Welcome to our AURP 2020 International Conference session, 5 Ways to be a Better Ally for Underrepresented Entrepreneurs. Just because we're not together today doesn't mean we can't still have our interactive discussions like we always do. So feel free to put your question in the chat. We'll have 5-minute Q&A at the end. And if there's anything you're uncomfortable with asking, feel free to use the private messaging portion of the platform, and I'll take a look at that question and get it up there as best we can. Our session today is important. It's now more than ever important, as with the difficulties that everyone is facing with the setbacks the pandemic has dealt us. It's important for us to be aware of the hurdles our more underrepresented communities are faced with. And our speaker today is here to give us a few strategies on how we can all be a part of the solution. She's an assistant professor at Emerson College and the author of the new book, Launching While Female, Smashing the System That Holds Back Women Entrepreneurs. Please welcome Suzanne Althoff. Suzanne?
Thank you for that introduction, Harry, and thank you everyone for attending this session. So today, my hope is to offer you ideas that you can start doing right now to be a better ally for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Let me start by introducing myself a little bit more than what Harry said, so that you know the point of view that I'm coming from. I'm a journalist by training, and for the last 4 years, I have researched women entrepreneurs and other underrepresented entrepreneurs, and I've collected my findings in my new book, Launching While Female. I set out to write this book because I wanted to document the hurdles that these entrepreneurs face, how they found success, and what needs to change to make the entrepreneurial space more accessible and inclusive. I interviewed more than 100 women and non-binary entrepreneurs in multiple industries across the country. I also interviewed experts in new business formation, mentorship, and other subjects. The book, as Harry said, is new. It just came out on October 27th. I am also an assistant professor at Emerson College in Boston. I teach publishing, entrepreneurship, and other subjects. And I've been at Emerson for 6 years. Before that, I had a 2-decade career as a magazine editor. My last post was editor-in-chief of the Boston Globe Sunday magazine. All right, so let me start by defining the term underrepresented entrepreneur so that we all are clear on what we're talking about. I am referring to entrepreneurs who are women, who are Black, Latinx, and Indigenous. Now, you see on your screen a data point from researchers who looked at US founders of venture capital-backed startups. So you can see the bolding, women, Hispanic, and African American have low representation rates. I want to note that these terms for race and ethnicity are the terms that the researchers used. And I also want to make clear that the researchers did not offer data on other entrepreneurs. For example, entrepreneurs who identify as non-binary or entrepreneurs who are Indigenous. But so this is who I am referring to this afternoon when I say underrepresented entrepreneurs. So this matters. This matters that we don't have full participation rates in our entrepreneurial space. And I'd like to offer you 2 data points that just look at women entrepreneurs. Researchers have estimated that if women started high growth companies at the same rate as men, we'd add 15 million jobs to the US economy in 2 years. At MIT, they looked at what would it mean if women faculty launched biotech startups at the same rate as the male faculty, and they estimated we'd have 40 additional new companies. I think we can all see the appeal of statistics like this, especially as we are trying to rebuild the economy during the pandemic and after the pandemic. The creation of new businesses and the creation of new jobs is going to be key, and for that to happen, we need really all hands on deck. We do not, obstacles that prevent some from realizing their full entrepreneurial potential will be a problem for us. So ally, this talk is about how you can become a better ally. And I thank you for attending. You've taken the first step of showing your interest in this subject. An ally is someone who is saying, I see that this is an issue for underrepresented entrepreneurs, and I want to do what I can, use whatever power or privilege I have to help underrepresented entrepreneurs. I don't want to give the impression that allyship is everything. There are funding disparities. There's bias and discrimination. There's women entrepreneurs have reported sexual harassment and assault. So multiple things need to be happening at once. But part of the picture is allies and the ways allies can be helpful. And they can be very helpful. Any discussion about allyship needs to include a warning about performative allyship. You may have also heard of this as optical allyship. This means the organizations or the people who, let's say, post something on their Instagram page or on their website, and that is the full extent of their work as an ally. Being an ally means constantly educating yourself, asking hard questions, being willing to be uncomfortable and perhaps hearing things that make you uncomfortable, being an honest listener and listening when someone says, that's not helpful for me, or that's contributing to the problem, and being willing and open to make changes. The quote that I'm highlighting here on the screen is from Bricks and Diamond. He's the head of diversity, the diversity consulting firm Big Answers. He is, of course, calling out people who are only thinking about allyship on social media and not making bigger, more significant changes in the work that they do. I also would like to share this tweet with you from Dr. Esther Chu. She is an emergency physician and a professor at the Oregon Health and Science University. She frequently speaks out on racism and sexism in healthcare. If you spend time on Twitter, I highly encourage that you follow her. She has wonderful things to say. So her tweet here is completely relevant to this afternoon's session. It's important to acknowledge that we should not call ourselves allies. That is something that others call us when they see the good work, the hard work that we're doing. And as she says, it doesn't stick. This is an ongoing process where we're constantly, as allies, we're learning what's needed, and we're working and we're trying. So this is not something that you do a few days of the month or a few days of the year. It is ongoing. All right, so I promised you I would share 5 things that I would like you to think about to be a better ally for underrepresented entrepreneurs. And the first one I would like to ask you to consider is to be a mentor and to be a sponsor. Researchers have shown the value of both mentoring and sponsors, and I certainly heard that repeatedly when I did my interviews with entrepreneurs. Mentors, of course, offer their advice and their skills, helps through pain points. Sponsors take a more active role than mentors. Sponsors open up their network. They pick up the phone, make a phone call and say, you've got to hear this entrepreneur's idea, or take a meeting with them. So these are important things. Mentors and sponsors are important for all entrepreneurs, but I raise this point for underrepresented entrepreneurs because there are a few hurdles here. As you see on the screen, the Me Too movement has had an unintended side effect, and there's been a chilling effect. Men have reported in surveys and to researchers that they feel less comfortable mentoring women. They feel that it is less safe. They worry that if they develop a close mentoring relationship with a woman, people might think that's an inappropriate relationship, or people may talk. This is problematic. Most entrepreneurs who look for mentors are often looking for people who are in senior level positions, senior level executives, or perhaps business faculty. And today still most of those positions are held by men, and in particular white men. So if the people who would be ideal mentors, if they say, I feel uncomfortable mentoring women, you can see how that's a problem for women entrepreneurs. Sponsorship as well, there's interesting research there. Researchers have documented a mini-me syndrome, and what this means is that sponsors often gravitate to proteges who share their gender or who share their race. As you see the statistic on the screen, 71% have a protege who shares their gender or race. So again, as with mentors, because the people who are in senior leadership roles or who are business faculty, because they so often tend to be white men, you can imagine how underrepresented entrepreneurs can come up with a shortage of mentors and sponsors. So I ask you, share your skills and your expertise and your abilities widely, and recognize that you should look to proteges and to entrepreneurs who perhaps don't share your gender or don't share your race or don't share other identities that you have. I want to highlight just a few things that make sponsorship so valuable. And I heard this from several of or actually many of the entrepreneurs that I interviewed. Some of them said, I almost feel like I'm over-mentored, but I'm under-sponsored. And they really want those sponsors to step in the position and really help lift them up. Making key introductions to people who are in your network but may not be in an underrepresented entrepreneurs network. If you're invited to a meeting where you know there will be investors or you know there will be potential customers, who could you bring with you? And not just bring them with you and let them sit in the corner, but actually take them around the room, make introductions, talk up their business, explain why you're excited about the business. That's so important coming from you. It's a kind of advocacy that is hard for the brand new entrepreneur, to do by themselves. Okay, so the next one, number 2, is to combat microaggressions. So let me make sure that we all understand what we are talking about when we say microaggressions. Microaggressions are these small activities that happen where your, as you see on the screen, your expertise is questioned, you hear something demeaning or belittling, you hear jokes about your race, about your body, about your gender. The important thing to know is individually microaggressions can seem like a small thing, right? Like, oh, it was a joke, or I didn't mean any harm. But the reason why microaggressions are so powerful and so damaging is because for people in marginalized groups, they are hearing these things repeatedly. It's an onslaught of one researcher has described it as like an onslaught of tiny sand particles that are just preventing you from getting ahead. I have a data point here on this slide that Black women are twice as likely as white women to hear colleagues, as you see, express surprise at their language skills or other abilities. I heard from women entrepreneurs that I interviewed that if they have male co-founders, when they have discussions with investors or advisors, all of the questions are directed to the men in the room, not to the women entrepreneurs. Or women entrepreneurs have reported hearing things like, oh, your business sounds so cute, or that's a great hobby, or that must be fun, instead of it being treated with the seriousness that it deserves. Especially I've heard from entrepreneurs of color having their expertise question, especially if they are working in fields, in tech fields or in other STEM fields. So what can allies do for microaggressions? The bystander theory comes into play here. If you are witnessing microaggressions, please speak up. I had the pleasure of interviewing the MIT economist Esther Chu. She has spent decades researching microaggressions. She's also coined the term micro inequities, which is a similar field to microaggressions. And she's done a lot of research on bystander training and the importance of bystanders. She especially notes that bystanders who are in position of power can really make a difference with microaggressions. It's hard for junior level people to speak up, and it's hard for the brand new entrepreneur to speak up. But if you hold some sort of position of power and you can stop a conversation or say, you know, someone was interrupted, let's listen to them, those actions make a big difference. The second thing that allies should be thinking about is a thing that Mary Rowe calls micro affirmations. The idea is that micro affirmations can dilute the power of microaggressions. Micro affirmations are small acts, small gestures that lift someone up. You're saying, I liked that idea. You're sharing that idea. You're broadcasting that idea on social media or in meetings. You know, so-and-so has said something important, or you're calling attention to someone's good ideas. Perhaps you're privately congratulating them or privately telling them that what their work is meaningful and their work is important to the community. Researchers have found that this does make a difference. This can lift up underrepresented entrepreneurs, and it can combat some of the damage that microaggressions do. All right, number 3, I would like you please as allies to consider representation and speaking up when you feel that you're not seeing full representation. And the example that I'm offering you here is from Mass Challenge. Mass Challenge is the very well-known accelerator for early stage startups. In 2008, they added more women judges. These are the judges who would decide which startups get accepted into the program. And that year, more than half of the startups that Mass Challenge accepted had a woman founder. So changing the makeup of a judging table makes a difference. And so I hope whatever your position is and whatever organization you're in, but you can look around and say, whether it's the judging table or the organization that puts together a speaker panel, is everyone represented that should be represented? I also, I mentioned keynote speakers. There's a lot of people who in hoping to be an ally have, whenever they are invited to speak, they will, before saying yes, they will ask the organizer, may I please ask who else is on the panel? And what they're doing is they're trying to avoid panels that are all male, all pale. So they are saying, let's say if you are a white man, you could politely ask, I'd like to see some more representation on this panel. Can I suggest names of other peoples who could also be included? And then making the hard decision to say no if you feel that you will not be on a panel that has full representation. Last I mentioned media coverage. This could be traditional media or social media, but helping amplify projects and ideas that come from underrepresented entrepreneurs can make a big difference. Okay, next I would like to ask you as an ally to think of making your culture inclusive in places where entrepreneurs gather or learn or network. Ask if underrepresented entrepreneurs would be welcome in these spaces. I'd like to highlight this quote here, which is quite powerful. This is referring specifically to accelerators and incubators, warning against creating programs that feel that they have a culture that is macho or exclusive. I recognize, of course, that all of you attending, you may not be leading these programs. You may be a participant or just an attendee, but even as a participant or an attendee, you have the power to speak up and say, I would like to see some changing in the program to make underrepresented entrepreneurs feel more welcome. I'd like to call your attention to one story that I learned while I was researching my book. I met a woman entrepreneur in St. Louis. She was working in the electrical engineering field. And she told me that to do social networking in her field, there were 3 options that were open to her. This was clay shooting, hunting, and golfing. None of these 3 activities were things that were near and dear to her heart, but she knew that she had to participate if she wanted to do crucial networking. She ended up going clay shooting. When she showed up, she was the first woman who had ever participated in this group's event. They did welcome her in. They did not have a gun that was the size for her, so she had to use a larger gun. Nonetheless, she told me she was happy that she went, and she made really crucial connections that day. She returned the next year, and one of the hosts had brought his wife's gun, so she had a gun that was the size for her. So this is somewhat an extreme example of having programs and options that only might appeal to some people. And for this particular example, I want to highlight that it's not necessarily a gender thing. There could certainly be men who do not consider clay shooting their preferred activity. So as allies, we should look around and say, are we seeing options and programming that feel welcoming to all, and that feel like all could participate? I'd like to give you another example of what I think is really exciting, varied programming. I was talking to someone at Greentown Labs, which is a clean tech startup incubator here in my hometown of Somerville, Massachusetts. During the pandemic, they are experimenting with virtual wine tasting, where everyone gets wine samples sent to their home, and then by Zoom you have a social activity where you're tasting wines. This has been a positive thing for them, but they recognize that there may be some participants who don't want to use alcohol, so they are also introducing a chocolate tasting version. There is the angel investing group, Pipeline Angels. They are particularly known for the fact that all of their events are alcohol-free. So that's something else for you to consider. Do we always have to have alcohol as a part of our programming? I suggest flexible access. I think we've all seen during the pandemic the fact that some things are, or actually all things, most things are remote, that a lot of people who previously couldn't participate are now able to participate. Perhaps people who had difficulty traveling, or people who had childcare concerns. So I would ask you, once we are past the pandemic and we return to in-person activities, think about if you can keep some remote or virtual activities going to allow access for entrepreneurs who may struggle to come to something in person. This is especially important for programs that might require people to move for 3 months. That can be disruptive for someone who doesn't have the financial resources or has family responsibilities. Using inclusive language and marketing materials. For example, this is an example of job postings, not entrepreneurship, but researchers have looked at words like ninja or rock star. You know, we're looking for a ninja, we're looking for a rock star. That can be a turnoff in job postings, and it can also be a turnoff when you're describing your innovation programs. Again, I recognize that not all of you are in the seat of devising these programs. You may just be a participant, but please know that you have a powerful voice. And if you speak up and say, I would like us to have this change or that offering, that can be quite a wonderful thing to do as an ally. Okay, so the final thing that I'd like to ask you to consider as an ally for underrepresented entrepreneur is to push for bigger changes. There's so much research on funding disparities, and funding disparities are a big reason why we are not seeing full participation by women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who are Black, Latinx, and Indigenous. So we really need a lot of people looking at this problem and pushing for change. I have a statistic here about the average level of startup capital for Black entrepreneurs versus white entrepreneurs. You know, we all know that having access to startup capital especially in the early days of a new company is crucial for that company. Our country has a Black-white racial wealth gap. To quote another statistic, the median net worth for white families is $171,000. As a comparison for Black families, it's $17,000. So, of course, this racial wealth gap influences who is able to self-fund their startup, or who has family and friends who can fund their startup. So as allies, we need to use our voice and our advocacy to push for more funding opportunities, either loans or grant programs or investing programs that are specifically open to underrepresented entrepreneurs. I'm also flagging student loan relief. There are 2 researchers at Northeastern who have shown that having student debt reduces the likelihood that someone will start a new company. If they do start a new company and have student loan debt, that debt reduces their business income. So, and who holds the most student debt? Black women hold the most student debt. So again, any program that you can push for or lobby for that addresses student loan debt would help underrepresented entrepreneurs who, because of their gender or race, typically end up having larger student loan levels. Okay, I hope that I've given you something to consider. I hope you find at least some things here that you feel like you can begin to latch onto right now to become a better ally for underrepresented entrepreneurs. I would love to hear your questions now. And if you'd like to connect with me in the future, here's my email address and other information. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to our conversation.
Suzanne, thanks for that. We'll go ahead and take a look at some questions from the group. And welcome everybody. Just like that, I've changed clothes, and I'd also like to welcome Suzanne live. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Harry. I changed clothes as well.
I just did. So as we mentioned in the chat, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. Jump in. Again, this is going to be an interactive conversation, but just to get things started, and I'll be a little selfish myself. How long have you been researching? How many people have you interviewed along the way?
It's 4th in behind that pair. Abico is 5th toward the outside. Public sector 6th back toward the rail. Mutaza.
Somebody right there. There you go. Sorry about that. Suzanne, I think I muted you by mistake. There we go. So back to my question, I had mentioned you'd been researching for a pretty good while, I think. And how many folks had you interviewed along the way?
Thank you, Harry. Yes, the research for the book Launching While Female took 4 years. I wrapped it up earlier this year, just before the pandemic started, and I interviewed a little over 100 women and non-binary entrepreneurs, and these were all across the country in multiple industries and at different stages of company formation. Some at the very beginning, others who had exited, sold their companies, now retired. So it was a wide spectrum.
How did you select the interviewees?
I knew that I wanted variety. So certainly I wanted to talk to people in what we consider the startup hubs of, Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. But I reached into Texas. I traveled to St. Louis and Atlanta. There's of course important entrepreneurial work going on all over the country. And so I felt it was important to highlight those examples as well. I did a ton of networking, and my last question at every interview was, who else should I talk to? Yeah. Who can you introduce me to?
Right, you just start that web and they'll lead you on to somebody else from there. So you said 4 years you were working on this, and then all of a sudden COVID-19 comes around. Did you have an opportunity to wrap back around with some of these folks and get back with them and ask them how this has impacted them?
I have kept in touch with them. Of course, there have been significant repercussions because of the pandemic. I'll start with just venture capital. I'm hearing anecdotally that the access to venture capital is disappearing. What I'm hearing is that a lot of investors are shrinking back to their own networks, which I think is understandable to some extent. It's hard to meet people, right? It's hard to meet people at a conference like we're attending right now. So a lot of people go back to the founders they've already invested in, or the founders that they know through their school network or other networks. There's data out, so that's venture capital. Actually, I should note there's a venture capital point, according to PitchBook, which studies venture capital. Venture funding for women founders has hit its lowest quarterly total in 3 years. So it's that's depressing. There's been a lot of data on Black-owned businesses and women-owned businesses feeling more of the effects of the pandemic, closing at higher rates, and also feeling that they will have a longer recovery time. So investment is certainly needed to help these business owners survive.
Suzanne, is it as simple as that, especially with COVID right now, that investors, their role in supporting these underrepresented communities, is it as simple as just pumping in more money to those communities, or is there a larger role that they can play beyond just the money?
Yes, I mean, so money is huge, right? And money that is not always venture capital. Grants are needed with no strings attached for the right business owners, of course.
Right.
Not turning on the fountain of money, but then just networking and mentorship and sponsorship. I mentioned in the talk sponsorship. Really having people step up and say, I'm going to offer my network to you, and I'm going to help you make these connections when it's so hard, especially now because so much is virtual. And then just simple promotion of the great businesses that already exist. If I can highlight one nonprofit in Atlanta that I think is doing really great work, it's called Buy From a Black Woman. And they have a directory on their website. If you can Google it, it's easy to find. And they give you ideas this is for consumers, for shopping from Black women owned and operated businesses. So even on an individual level during the pandemic, we can be very choosy about how we direct our dollars.
And that's a great transition there, because I was going to say, from my personal standpoint, I'm not an investor. I'm considered an ordinary person, but you mentioned that type of stuff that doesn't cost anything, promoting people, bringing awareness and attention to those underrepresented entrepreneurs and their businesses. So that, to me, is one of the biggest things I take away from this, is that, while we may not be pumping money into that community, that's a simple way anyone can be a part of moving this forward, right?
Absolutely, yes. It makes such a difference if you can say at your university, for example, let's bring in this person as a speaker. Let's get some more attention for this person, or simply preventing an interruption in a meeting is meaningful.
And that's one of those things that I picked up on when we recorded this a couple of weeks back. You mentioned microaggressions. Totally get microaggressions, more aware of that now over the past few years. But one of the things you and I spoke about were micro affirmations. That was a term I had never heard of before. Give us an example of those micro affirmations, because again, I like to think that I'm one of those people that, I'm not going to go online and just complain on Amazon about something. I'm that type of person that I'd rather give kudos to somebody. Is it as simple as that with micro affirmations?
Yes, so this is the term that was coined by Mary Rowe, the MIT researcher, and she says yes, these can be done privately or publicly. Sometimes it's just reminding someone of the good that they are doing in their community and how important it is that their business exists. But yes, sometimes it's publicly drawing attention to someone, interrupting someone who is using belittling language or making jokes at someone's expense.
Yeah.
Mary Rowe talks about how the silent bystanders, how troubling that is when we see behavior and circumstances happening that we don't step in.
Yeah, and it really is. One of the things that you had mentioned in your presentation, there was a statistic that I picked up on that it said, I think it was maybe 2-to-1. I think Black women hear these microaggressions more than anyone else. Private, when they're not present, that people need to be proactive against that as well. Because I think a lot of people take, solace in the fact that, oh, somebody's not here, we can talk about them. People have to start combating that too, in order to create this culture where it is widely accepted that this is not okay, right?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Harry. Absolutely. We have heard so much this summer, especially. It's not enough to say, I am not racist, but are you actually participating in anti-racism work? Are you changing the structures that are around you? Are you changing situations that perhaps you even benefit from, but situations that you recognize as being unfair or exclusive? Harry, can I bring up, I saw in the chat, someone was raised a question about the term underrepresented entrepreneurs, which I think is an excellent question. I'm so someone flagged that. So certainly that is a term that I'm using in this talk. And the person who asked the question raised an issue, is this the best term to use? I think that's a really important discussion to have. I'm using it. I recognize that it has flaws. There is the very well-known venture capitalist Arlen Hamilton, and she says, don't call us underrepresented, call us underestimated, which I really like that powerful flip of the phrase. I've heard other people also say untapped entrepreneurs, which also speaks to the potential that we are missing out on. But in a bigger sense, I think this is a really great question, just to use care with our language. Sometimes you will hear people talk about non-white entrepreneurs, and I find that very problematic because it centers whiteness. So, so often the solution for these questions is ask the groups that you are thinking about with a talk title. Ask them, what do they feel comfortable with? You will get multiple answers, but ask a lot of people. Don't fall back on the language that is comfortable to you.
Absolutely. It will be uncomfortable for that 1 second, but once after that's taken care of, moving on. So I agree with that. Well, Suzanne, I want to thank you for your time today. I think it was a very informative presentation. I hope everyone got as much out of it as I did. I do want to invite you, after this, we are going to move on to our group discussions about the new normal for research parks and how we're going to be disrupted. You should all have a Zoom link that will put you into a group. If you have that, please go ahead and in just a moment, head over to that and join a group and discuss that with us. But virtually, if everyone would help me in joining and giving Suzanne a round of applause, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Suzanne. Good to see you. Bye-bye.